Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santy, and we're doing an episode with Mike Huber, and it's one of those where he has questions for me based on a previous episode. So I'm excited. We're going to talk about the episode with Greg Santucci, right? Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So I'm just going to turn it over to you then, Mike.
All right. And I have to say, this is the hard one because I listened to it a while ago. I was going to re-listen, but since then I've been just following his, Facebook
It's
page. Just like, now, which thing was from the podcast? But there was one point in the podcast where he was explaining, because he works with, I think I have this right? He works for a school district or something where he'll go into classrooms to help teachers who are have whatever challenging
or at some point
behaviors.
in his career, that's been one of the things he does. Yeah.
So he said that teachers would often say, but this always worked for me. And and so he had a response at the time, and I thought, he covered 100 things in that
I think
episode.
It started with a post he had made about not using managing behavior, not using that phrase anymore.
That's
And that's so we went in all different directions. But
so
when he said, the teacher says this always worked before, he's talking about behavior management techniques, maybe even behavior charts, clip charts.
It was a behavior chart, I believe. Yep. Yeah. Thank you, because I did not put that part of my notes.
Okay, good thing I listened to it. This would be
thankfully someone is on top of it here. But I thought that was really interesting because, and you didn't quite react, right? But I'm sure you've had the same experience, especially when you have a co-teacher who has a different idea and someone says, but it always worked for me. First of all, have you had that experience with a co-teacher or, a colleague in some way?
Definitely. Both with co-teachers, and then when I was a center director and a teacher coach, that was frequent because I was coming in with whole different ideas about how to talk about behavior and how to address it, and not gimmicky solutions. And they were very much craving the gimmicky solution or talking about how it has always worked before. So definitely.
So I'll say one thing before I ask you your question, because I know it's mostly me asking you questions, but it reminds me, I don't know, maybe there was a year ago, we had this one child who, so they had autism and they had a hard time, like when they'd wake up from nap, a toddler, kind of figuring out where they were, it took them a lot longer than a neurotypical child in figuring out where they are when they wake up.
That sort of scared look on their face as soon as their eyes open.
And then be crying. And so we had a, what do we call her at the time? Inclusion specialist who would go in to help the teachers. And so at first, often what she does is she would go in and kind of work with the child herself first to get to know the child and then give ideas to the teachers. And so she would often hold the child and just kind of walk around with him, calming the child down, and it would take 20 minutes. And so after a while of doing this, but she realized the length of time would shorten for the child to calm down. And so she finally let the teacher know, so I found that this works the best, and so I think it was the first day the teacher was doing it without the inclusion specialist there. And so the inclusion specialist, her and I were hanging out in the hallway kind of, so the teacher, could come out if she needed help. And so she comes out holding the child's still crying. And she's like, it's not working. And, the inclusion specialist kind of like, well, no, this is what you do, but there isn't an on-off switch. And I just loved that term.
Yes.
Because I think teachers want, what's the thing? And I just flip this switch and now the child behaves the way I want. But I am curious how because in that case, like if she had said there's no on-off switch, it came across as being it wasn't snarky. I guess that's the way I'll say it. Like, I think she probably also added, I know it's hard, or, it is like, it's loud or whatever, but, he will come down. There's no on-off switch. So it wasn't like she just said, there's no on-off switch. But I'm curious what you've said to staff, like teachers, or if you're the director and talking to teacher or whatever, because it is one where you don't want to, Right. I mean, because it's a question of compliance. They're trying to make the child comply, but at the same time, your job isn't to make the teacher comply.
Yeah.
Like, just do it because you said so.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious how you've brought it up to.
Yeah. Well, I
teachers.
can't guarantee that there has not been snark in some of my responses, especially earlier in my career, and probably most likely with co-teachers. More likely that it was a co-teacher I snarked at. But so usually I would say, what does that mean? How do you know it worked before? What did that look like when it worked before? And or I would try to say, so you never saw the behavior again? Like, it worked, he doesn't do it anymore. And they'll be like, no, it's still ongoing, and that's why I want to talk to you. I want you to fix it or whatever. And it's like, so it hasn't worked in the past, is what you're saying. Or so it worked short term, but you had to address it all the time for a very short term success. And that would sort of be a segue to, well, let's look at how we could maybe look at more long-term change or success. Or depending on what the behavior was, I would ask them to tell, of course we would already have had either I'm in the room and I know what it is, or they've already told me what's happening. It might be a conversation about whether it needs to change, whether the child needs to change, or whether the adult needs to change. Just depending on what it was.
Right. I feel like if you're going to talk about managing behavior, it should be about, so manage your behavior.
Exactly.
You can do that.
Yeah. Whose behavior are we talking about? And so I use this a lot in trainings, and I did a blog post, but I also would use it in one-on-one conversations. I have like a matching game, and down one column is when children do, and then it's all kinds of things, like they can't get a puzzle in the right piece in the right spot, or they aren't tall enough to drink from the drinking fountain, or they say farkly instead of sparkly, or they call a dog a cat, all these sort of not mistakes, but I'll say mistakes in other developmental areas. And then the other column is then you should, and it's just a list of all the sort of punitive, crazy short-term attempts that I've seen in early childhood classrooms. And I ask them to match.
Put them on yellow. Oh,
exactly.
Wrong.
Tell them they've made you very sad. That kind of shit.
That one hurt. Like, just
I hate it. Yes, it really does break my heart.
Like, emotional abuse is your way of dealing with the child.
Exactly. Emotional blackmail, I called it once, and I got in trouble.
Yeah, that's probably more.
I hurt my
emotional abuse might be too.
Yeah. So then, like when I use that in a training, I say, draw a line from this column to the correct response. And I just watch them all, like looking to see if anybody else is drawing any lines. And finally, someone will be brave enough to say, I don't think any of these are the right response. And so then we'll talk about, well, why? Well, you're not going to punish a child for not being tall enough, because they just need time to grow. So we're going to give them a footstool. Or so it's, that helps them sort of connect.
And a footstool is a great metaphor for what they might do.
Yeah.
For emotional.
Yeah. Or what's one of the other ones? They can't get that puzzle piece in just right. Well, what would you do? Well, I would look and see if the puzzle's too hard, and I would maybe model for them and talk through my process as I'm trying to figure out how to make this puzzle piece fit. And I'd be like, well, so you wouldn't move them to yellow? You wouldn't give them a timeout? And no, that's mean. That would be terrible. And that would help connect sometimes in conversations, not always, depending on my.
Well, what I like about that is you're taking it out of, because if you talk about a person, what they're doing, how they're interacting with a child who's whatever, having a tantrum, throwing things, grabbing toys from other kids, whatever the, social or emotional thing is, because that's usually the challenging behaviors. We don't consider, like you said, not doing a puzzle as challenging.
Yeah.
But that's a teacher choice, or that's a society choice. But you're removing them from that part where they could feel like you're being mean to them or snarky to them,
Mm-hmm.
and talking about, let's see what you do in these cases. Because that idea, like you said, modeling, the teacher can then give you the answer.
Yeah.
Oh, so you model with the puzzle. How could you model this? So
Yeah.
that
And
it's
so,
really nice that you take it out of that thing, and then you can
right.
build it
Because
back for them of like,
there's
so
less
you'll do the same
emotion.
thing.
Yeah, there's less emotion if we're talking
Yeah.
about puzzles
Yeah.
and mispronunciations and um, tall drinking fountains, and less of their ego engaged in that, or a different part of their ego engaged in solving that problem. And at the end, we have this list of ways that we've helped them with all of these developmental issues that have come up, and we can take that list and transfer it directly to then the behavior
Yeah.
problems. So if they know that a child sometimes just needs lots of practice, lots of me showing them, lots of me talking about it to be able to get that puzzle piece in, then I can talk about how, that's the same thing with behavior. They need a lot of it
Right.
before you might see a difference. Or they
Yeah.
might be able to do it one day and not the other day. And with a puzzle piece, we understand that it's developmental, but with behavior, we suddenly get into this good or bad, compliant or non-compliant options that help no one.
Right. And I do feel like there is an ego thing for the
Mhm.
teacher and an emotional reaction. Just, we are, program's the wrong word, but it goes right to your amygdala when there's a certain scream or cry.
Yeah.
Right. So you do want to react in a certain way. It's like going right past the frontal lobe of like, stop that,
Yeah.
and it's an important mechanism. So, babies don't starve to death, even if it's the middle of the night, because they're going to cry and it's going to trigger a response from the adult that they will wake up from anything. As tired as they might be, they're going to go over to that child and do something so the child stops crying. It's also, of course, why we have shaken baby, and
Yes. Yeah.
it can go awry, but it's also why we respond to children. And so
because we're not
that's
using
where I feel
our reasoning part of
self-awareness.
the brain.
Yeah. That's where, self-awareness, mindfulness can be helpful of like, wow, that they're really upset and I'm feeling upset.
Yeah.
Let me take a breath and let me help the child or whatever. Like, I feel like sometimes where I've done it wrong in the past is immediately go to the problem solving for the teacher. Oh, here's how you address, so they need help. So model this, and realize I have to let the teacher first know it's okay that it really makes you mad. And your first instinct is to, just grab the toy out of that kid's hand and say, it's not yours.
Yes. Yeah. I'm putting this up.
Right. I'm putting this up. But what you do have to do then is your actual action has to be different, but to, at least give them permission to have that initial reaction. Cause I feel like in the past, when I've shortchanged that, there are some teachers who just like, I tried and I can't do it. And it's like, oh, I worked with a teacher just a few months ago where we just had the other teacher in the room knew he's working on this. And so whenever it was like, his whole thing was just when it gets to that point, you step back, the other teacher's going to handle it, but you just work on, notice what your emotion is. And then after a week, then we did another coaching. Okay, now think about what you might do.
Yeah.
And then it was like 3 weeks in, I think, where it's like, okay, now go do it. Like, you're the one who's going to do it. And the other teacher is there if you need help. But like, he really needed, there was a particular, two kids that, they just sort of, we have one supervisor who explains it this way. The teacher does this, and what they need to do is this.
Yes, that's beautiful.
So it's a visual for the.
It'll come out in a couple days.
Okay, yeah. But you're knocking two fists together, or you're cradling. Like you're supporting the child, right? And so he was at that point where he was it was hard, and during COVID, it's sort of like we're all stuck in one.
Yeah.
Thing, because he wasn't. He was like a float, so he didn't necessarily normally wouldn't be in one classroom and just here he is in one classroom. And now what do you do? Like there's, so he's had never been in that situation where he had to just figure this out with these kids, which a lot of teachers have to, of course, but
but there's pressure in those moments too, especially if you feel like people are watching you. And so the other thing, if I was using those analogies with staff, was to make sure that they knew that I'm not looking for you to have the right answer all the time.
Mhm.
I'm looking for you to be thoughtful about your response,
Yeah.
and to be in control of yourself,
Right.
sort of before you act on a child.
Yeah.
I just want to see some sort of intention
Right.
rather
Right.
than just, automatically timeout or automatically moving clips around or,
Right.
slipping
Right.
into that emotional blackmail.
Yeah. So the other thing, the word that came to me, I don't think you two brought it up in your podcast, but it seems like we often use the term egocentrism to be about kids. And yet it seems like it's a very egocentric way that sort of the charts that you and Greg were talking about, or just managing behavior, is very egocentric, right? That the child has to change because
Right.
I'm not liking it. And
Because of my needs.
yeah. And so, and I guess that's in a way, by you switching to those other examples, you're taking the ego out a bit.
Yeah.
Because people don't have that same, like, I feel really bad because the kid in my room is too short to reach this. Or, man, they couldn't do a 12-piece puzzle. I must be a horrible teacher. Now, sometimes parents get that, right? The kid who, if the parent was an athlete and they feel bad when their child can't do it or whatever, or musician or whatever. But as a teacher, you tend not to have those ego things. But around behavior, it's almost like, and our society probably expects, like, kids are going to behave, right?
Right.
Even that word.
Yep.
Around you, that's an indication of how good of a teacher you are. And
Absolutely.
The quieter your room, the better teacher you are.
Right. We've all been socialized, enculturated, whatever word you want to use, in the United States and probably other places, but certainly in the United States, that you can't just let kids get away with stuff.
Right.
There has to be something. So it almost takes on a tone of revenge. Like, there has to be punishment. There has to be sorrow. Like when I was talking to a group in a school age program that I led, I was talking to the staff, and I was trying to explain why we were moving away from timeouts, why we weren't going to use those anymore. And one of the teachers or one of the staff was like, well, I don't know, because when I was a kid, timeout was like the worst thing you could do to me. And I think it really works. And I was like, so what you're saying is
you want the worst for
you think that they should feel very bad and have sorrow and feel like this is the worst thing that could be done to me because they made a mistake,
right.
And they're 8, which was snarkier than I would have been. Now, it was a long time ago.
But that person apparently likes feeling bad. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She just told you it's great because I felt bad when it happened.
Right. And I think part of, once we slip into thinking, I have a responsibility for teaching children, guiding children, whatever word you want to use, your ego is very much tied up in that. So if children are not behaving, we need like a quote sound effect or a sarcasm sound effect for that.
Right.
But if they're not doing that, then I'm not doing my job, and I'm not in control, and other people are seeing me not be in control, and it becomes very stressful and hard work and not rewarding work at all. I did a workshop about observing children a couple nights ago, and one of the anecdotes I use or scenarios, an example of an observation that I use, is a 4-year-old who is telling a story about the goats at his house and making all the people at the table laugh. And he takes his napkins and covers his ears when he's talking about how loud the goats are. And then the kid next to him covers his ears with crackers. And I was talking about how you can be one of two teachers in that situation. You can be the one who's annoyed that there's noise and feels like that was misbehavior to use your napkins and crackers for that. Or you can be the teacher who looks at the problem solving and the creativity and the sense of humor and the social aspect of it. And which one feels better at the end of the day? Like the hard ass teacher who just wants a silent, easy snack time, or the teacher who's looking at that and saying, this is a wonderful moment to be part of.
Yeah, I know. And that's the thing I try to convey to teachers is like, it's going to feel better in the long run. Once you
Yeah.
learn to let go of those things and take
Mhm.
joy, the kids also will take joy. And the
Right.
kids will still feel, for that teacher who wants kids to feel awful, children still feel shame when they do something and they realize it
Yeah,
hurt someone's feelings.
absolutely.
So just so you
They
know, they'll
they
still
don't
feel bad.
really need our help. They don't need it
They
piled
don't,
on most of the time.
right. But that idea when you're the one who's comforting them in that,
Mhm.
and maybe you're like, oh, you feel so bad. I'm sorry you feel that way. Do you think there's something you could do that would, you could show your friend that you know, feel bad about that or whatever? You know,
Mhm.
you can be the person who helps a child learn how to do repair.
Yeah.
And that, like, the just the relationship you end up building with the kid. And really that teacher I talked about, that's what he was learning, right? That he was getting into this. The only way he could deal with it was by being sort of punitive, right? All right,
Yeah.
you're done with that toy or whatever. And then suddenly it was like, oh, I'm expressing joy. I'm, you know,
Yeah.
and it's amazing to watch right now. He's just like, you know, helping a 5-year-old make his first graphic novel, and, you know, novel, but,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
5 pages, but
Yeah.
but it's chapter 1.
Yes. Part of a
You know, so
journey.
just that idea of like finding the groove and finding, and it's a kid who was just as, you know, can be just as whatever you want to call that, contradictory to,
Mhm.
like when you ask for something and they like, no, I don't want to. And it's like, what, how do you react to that with a child who says, no, I don't want to, you know,
Uh-huh.
like, do you sort of say, wow, you really don't want to do that right now, huh?
Yeah.
And then decide. If it's like going home, there's not a lot of choice. It's like, we're
Right.
not staying here overnight. You're you're going.
Everyone else is going home. You're going to be
Yeah, yeah.
real lonely.
But at the same time, are you going to try to work with the child, or are you going to like, just like, I'm the teacher, you do what I say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Or figuring out elaborate reward systems. You know,
yeah, right. Like,
if you just go when it's time to go, we'll put a sticker, you'll get to take a sticker home or whatever that might be. That's just, as Alfie Kohn says, the other side of the coin,
mhm.
like rewards and punishment.
Yeah, I'm still
So
working with some teachers on that. We'll see if they
yeah,
listen to this podcast,
it's really
because
hard.
then it's like they, what I see constantly is like they're getting ready to go outside. They got their winter stuff on.
Hmm.
And so, oh, wait, I just helped her zip up. Can I go put you know, and
Yeah.
it's just like, so now are you only doing it because,
Yeah.
but, you know, with one
So
classroom, I
again,
was,
a short term it works,
yeah,
but in the long term, she's not becoming a more
yeah.
oh, what's the word I want? I don't
She's
know.
not
Helpful,
internally
social,
motivated,
internally motivated. Yeah.
intrinsically motivated, I
Yeah.
guess is,
Yes,
it's more,
that's the
she's
one.
only doing it for,
For what's in
there
it
is
for
one
her.
classroom. I said, so it sounds, these kids really like helping each other. Now, what if you get rid of the chart?
Yeah.
And they did. And it's, the kids still are like, hey, I just helped her zip her coat. Oh, you did. That was very thoughtful.
Yeah.
Um, and get away from the word nice. That's like
Please,
my thing
yes.
too, right? It's
Yeah.
just,
Or you're a good friend.
or a
I
good
think
friend.
that's really
Yes.
confusing too. So I usually just say, oh, that was helpful. Or,
Yeah.
oh, thank
Helpful,
you.
thoughtful, depending what the thing is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was kind.
Kind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like the chart thing, I'm glad you brought up the chart, because
Yeah.
that's, I don't remember if you and Greg talked about it, because I know we were sort of talking about the episode,
Yeah.
but it's the same idea of the managing behavior.
Uh-huh.
And people will say, well, it worked. It's always worked for me before with the
Yeah.
chart too.
Yeah. And so specifically with charts, when people say to me, well, it's always worked before, what they mean is children, or what they're thinking about is children who would already be acting in the ways that please them
Right.
continue to act in those ways and stay up on green.
Right.
But it's
Yeah.
not working for the children who are perpetually on red or yellow.
Right.
And that's the story Greg told about his
Yeah.
son.
Yeah.
And the other kid in the class was always on yellow, and then the day that his son got moved to yellow, the son was like, now I'm just like Wyatt. Like, that's such,
I forgot. I wanted to talk about that part too.
like, that was just infuriating, but that's what happens.
I was on the
Everybody knows
highway
who's
when
the
that
bad
part came
kid.
up in the podcast. So I didn't write it down, but the Wyatt story
Yeah.
of, what are we teaching the other kids?
Yes.
We've been talking about the managing the behavior of the kid. And I think you and Greg talked about it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way his son reacted. Because it's like, what are
Yeah.
we teaching kids about And even if it's just saying the child's name with a loud voice, like, yep, you're
Or
always saying
just saying their
Richard.
name more than any, yes,
Yeah,
more than any other names. Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
And so really being conscious of that, because what we really want to do is teach kids how to get along with other kids and not get along with the kids who do what I want, get along
Right.
with the kids even when they don't do what I want.
Yeah.
And
Because so much of behavior management now, we've sort of euphemized it. And we talk about social and emotional development now, or
yes,
social and emotional skills. But what we still mean most of the time is compliance
yes.
and getting them to function
Mm-hmm.
as a group that doesn't present a challenge for the teacher.
Yeah.
And so it really still is just focused on those kids who make it tough for us.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the other word that's the buzzword now, co-regulation,
Yes.
when
Well,
really it's
and
making a kid comply.
self-regulation.
And
Yeah.
self-regulation.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
we're
doing this
so
because they need to
good.
learn self-regulation. It's like,
Yes.
well, if they need to learn self-regulation, let them fail
Right.
and help them figure out how to
Yeah.
fix it. Even
Yeah.
I talk to teachers, even like when a kid's walking down the hall and turns their head and is going to walk into something, it's like, unless it's like, a razor blade, like, let them bump into it, because that's the information they get.
Uh-huh.
So their proprioceptive sense and
Yeah.
their brain and their eyes, like what they're seeing, all
Right.
those things have to work in conjunction. You talking to them actually makes it harder, first of all. So they don't even learn, because now they're trying to pay attention to what you said. So now they're using their hearing also to process what you said while they're about to bump into something. And then after they bump into it, then you tell them, you got to watch where you're going, as if bumping into the thing wasn't enough information. Like,
Right.
they needed to also be shamed that they could have prevented it.
Yeah. You fool.
You fool. Yeah. And it's just like, if you just let the kids bump into things, you'll actually find they are able to navigate walking quicker than the kids who keep getting told, watch where you're going, watch where you're going. It doesn't actually help. It wouldn't help a teacher if you constantly told them every single thing they did wrong.
Right.
If you, as a coach or a director.
And they would be so annoyed, and they would be, it's that we joke, people joke about implementing the behavior charts in the break room and using it for adults, or doing it in a staff meeting. And we all think that's, just a funny thing, but man, very few adults would stand for it, to be treated the way we treat children in terms of behavior management.
Right. Yeah. I said very few. You did allow that some people would.
Some people would.
And in certain
take it.
contexts as well, I guess. But
yeah.
Those are the main things I wanted to kind of get out of how you actually talk about managing behavior with people. I really like your examples there of bringing out the concrete things. I mean, there's so much, like, I could do an episode just on everything that Greg said, but I think people would be better off listening to Greg.
I know he and I have been trying to reschedule or schedule more conversations, and it just always we haven't quite made the connection yet. One or the other of us forgets to respond, and we don't quite get it. But yes, and follow him on Facebook. Now, I'm going to plug my own stuff here for just a minute.
Yes.
Plug my own stuff. On my website, in my blog, there is a post called The Matching Game, or a guidance matching game, or something that shows the actual sheet that I'm talking about, and talks about how I use it with teachers. It's one of the favorite things I've done is develop that.
Well, I was going to say, I'm going to use that one.
Game. Yeah. Well, you can find the matching game on that blog. I think whenever we can shift talking about behavior stuff and kind of move it into a conversation about development in other areas, and how we would respond if it was a cognitive thing we were seeing that they still needed to work on, or language delay or something like that. It's easier for adults then to disconnect from those old ideas about something has to happen to a kid who's done something wrong.
Right.
And Dan Hodgins says all the time, and actually I'm recording with him this afternoon about this, a quote, but he says all the time, we have to stop turning developmental issues into moral issues.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a brilliant, succinct way of talking about this shift. But it's hard because we all grew up that way, and see the charts on Pinterest, and we get into teacher groups and complain about the child who makes things hard for us. And it takes a lot of work on the part of the grown-up to make sure that we are responding fairly and helpfully and professionally and ethically in all of those situations.
Yeah. And then for coaches, directors, and such to figure out how to help teachers get to that point without us trying to just make the teachers comply or right. Like there's
performance reviews are
that's
just,
also development, right?
Performance
it's a developmental
reviews are
issue
just
for
grown-up behavior charts.
Exactly. And you have to be careful of that. So cool.
All right, thanks. This was a good one.
Yeah, thank you.
I just don't ever listen to the podcast once I've sent it out into the world because I annoy myself. But it was fun to go back and listen because that was a good conversation. So
we actually have to listen to ours, Teaching with the Body and Mind.
Yeah.
The episodes are shifting to a new location, new address, teachingwiththebodyandmind.com. And some of the descriptions did not make it in the migration. So we have to listen to them to remember
figure out what
you're
talking about. Oh, well,
it's not just a number.
Well, you don't have a stupid, weird laugh that you have to listen to when you listen to your own podcast. Or
I'm
listen
annoyed
to yourself
by my
just
voice
saying,
too.
All right. Well, I'm glad you got your podcast plugged in there too. I should have given you that opportunity before. So check us both out, everybody. Everybody go check us both out. And check Greg Santucci out. He's on Facebook.
Definitely.
And I guess that's it.
Okay.
We'll be back for another episode. Yeah, thank you, Mike. All right, everybody come back again next week for another episode. And thanks for coming this week.